Good morning. Today's Bible readings were both from the book of Jonah, and I think I fell in love with Jonah first as a little boy because, it's a great story. You've got sea monsters swallowing people and throwing them up. You've got worms that can consume whole trees. What's not to love? And then I kind of forgot about it, went on the back burner for a while until 1970. Some of you will remember a very popular catalog at the time, the Whole Earth catalog. The book was about 18 inches long, about 3 inches thick, with all sorts of new age and hippie type stuff, products. But down in the left-hand corner of each page was a piece of a story, a continuing tale that traveled throughout the book. And one of the passages in there was written by a clergyman's daughter, and she was recounting the story of Jonah. And she had just enough irreverence in the story to, get me intrigued about it and thinking about it again. And so when the opportunity came up to start thinking about Jonah more seriously for this sermon, it was a very welcome opportunity. There are so many lessons in Jonah, it's kind of hard to know where to start. A lot of commentators focus on the many metaphors in the story between the life of Jonah and the life of Jesus. One of the most obvious is the 3 days spent in the belly of the great fish, with the 3 days that Christ spent in the tomb. Leviathan, the great monster of the deep, referenced elsewhere in the Old Testament, represents the very embodiment of evil, hell. But equally common to the metaphors in the scriptures are very deep moral truths. And there's a really big one in Jonah. See, Jonah, like the book of Ruth, which was written about the same time, is clearly focusing on the non-exclusivity of God. God is not only concerned with the Jewish people, but all people. So in this book, which, by the way, is not the direct message of Jonah, but rather a narrative about him, we're presented with a direct confrontation against the idea that God's love and care is exclusive only to the Hebrew people. See, biblical narrators were more than historians. They tried to interpretively recount the past with the unswerving purpose of bringing it to bear on the present and future events. In the portrayal of these past events, though, they used the material to achieve this end very effectively. But that doesn't mean that the integrity with which they treated the past is always to be questioned. The book of Jonah recounts real events in the life and ministry of the prophets. Now, Nineveh, which is located on the Tigris River in a part of what is today called the city of Mosul in Iraq, was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It was a great commercial hub along the trade routes between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, and was a center of very high learning and artistic achievements. According to archaeological findings, one library is estimated to have contained over 30,000 clay tablets. The city had large public gardens filled with temples and palaces with very elaborate relief paintings. It's also of note that the city was the site of many earthquakes, which periodically through the centuries caused great destruction. So the books of Nahum and Tobit are almost exclusively about the destruction of Nineveh. This destruction had already happened, so these prophecies were really histories. Jonah was written during the reign of King Jeroboam II, whose leadership was marked by the reunification of the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel. Peace with some neighbors was achieved, and a sense of general prosperity was throughout the kingdom. So why was Nineveh considered so evil and dangerous to Israel? Well, part of the reason that Jeroboam was so successful in reuniting the kingdom of Israel and wresting control from Damascus lay in the internal struggles going on within the Assyrian Empire, which reduced their ability to act decisively. Nonetheless, it was still a threat. So Jonah, like all stories, contains some truth, some lore, and a whole lot of symbolism. If you pick any large city, you're going to find both the very best and the very worst of humanity. It will be the home of great artists, scientists, and humanitarians. It'll also be the home to criminal gangs, political corruption, and temptations to sin galore. You may think about Chicago or Los Angeles or Beijing. The city's king, Sennacherib, laid siege to Jerusalem in 701 BC. That was recorded in the book of 2 Kings and again in Isaiah. The book of Nahum is sort of an Israelite taunt song about Nineveh's destruction by the Babylonians in 612 BC. For Nahum, Nineveh is a city of bloodshed. As a matter of fact, it's pretty hard to find any reference in the Bible to Nineveh that has a positive spin. Now, whether or not Jonah had actually been to Nineveh, nobody knows. All of his knowledge may have been firsthand, or it may have been secondhand. We do know that Jonah had anointed King Jeroboam's grandfather, so he was a family friend and confidant. If the local stories about Nineveh were not enough to have colored his opinions, perhaps concerns expressed in the palace about the military prowess of the Assyrians was enough to make it a threat in his mind. So when God tells him to go to Nineveh to save them from destruction, the thoughts going through his head may have been similar to those of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who, when the Nazis took over Germany, had to decide whether to stay and fight for truth and justice or flee. In the end, he was captured and executed by the Nazis. So after Jonah's attempted escape from the God of Israel, which was thwarted by sailors who were savvy enough to be able to discern between a meteorological storm and a theological storm, Jonah finds himself vomited out on dry land by the fish. Now, whether it was a great fish, a whale, Leviathan of old, or maybe a life raft given to him by the sailors, somehow Jonah made it to the shore, and because God had saved him, he says, okay, God, you win. I'll go to Nineveh. Maybe we're reading a little too much into the story. The explanation for Jonah's reluctance might be as simple as he already had a whole lot on his plate. I know there are times, and that the past 3 weeks has been one of them for me, when I have so many projects with deadlines underway and so many glitches to work through to achieve those deadlines, that the routine things of life, the really important things, like inviting a friend in need over to an outdoor socially distant meal, seem like an imposition. Jonah probably had a really good life going on back home. He was a known and respected prophet, in high demand in the synagogues, advisor to the king. Who needs to travel all the way to Nineveh for what might turn out not only to be an utter failure, but a very dangerous mission? But he goes. Onward to the great city, said to be inhabited by 120,000 souls. And lo and behold, a little bit of street corner preaching and word spread throughout this great city of his message. Everyone said, wow, he's right. We've not been treating people well, and a lot of stuff going on here is really sinful. We better clean up our act. Even the king puts on sackcloth and sits in ashes and fasted. False accusations against people were recanted, stolen property returned. Everyone was truly repentant. And God said, wonderful. Welcome back to the fold. It's kind of like the story of the prodigal son, isn't it? So the bottom line was, Jonah was a big hit as a prophet and an evangelist. He'd certainly go down as one of the all-time greats. Why wasn't he happy? You know, there's a part of many people that find that a way to elevate themselves lies in diminishing others. Some are very aware of this and act intentionally to put other people down, to try to thwart their plans or exclude them from avenues of success. Other ways of elevating one's position or justifying oneself may be a little more subtle, maybe never voiced or acted upon, and seem to come from some instinctual drive over which we may not have conscious control. For example, when you're driving down 95, and you're being really careful and courteous to other drivers, making sure you're following all the rules, and somebody cuts you off, driving way too fast and erratically, nearly causing you an accident, what goes through your mind? I have to confess, I always have an image that about a mile down the road, I'm going to come upon that driver, either having been involved in a terrible accident or pulled over by the state troopers, getting what they deserve. I know it's wrong to wish bad things on others, and I ask God's forgiveness. But honestly, that's the first thought goes through my mind. There are a whole lot of people that annoy us. Those of you who attended our church's rendition of Mozart's Requiem Mass or saw the Oscar-winning film Amadeus may recall a piece from that work, Confutatus. The words are, Confutatus maledictus, flammis acribus addictus, voca me cum benedictus. If your Latin's a little rusty, the translation is, when the accursed have been confounded and given over to the bitter flames, call me with the blessed. Maybe somewhere in Jonah's mind is the idea that the destruction of Nineveh will somehow show Israel that they've been doing the right things all along and strengthen their resolve to be the embodiment of Torah. There are some people who have the potential to do us harm. Our human nature, perhaps our survival instinct, tells us to eliminate the threat. Alas, God usually has a different plan. The story of Jonah is not that God punished Jonah for not doing his will or not being happy over the redemption of the people of Nineveh. God did not pursue Jonah during his attempted escape to Joppa to punish him. He wanted to make sure that Jonah knew that no matter where he went or what he did, God was going to be there for him. The story is about God being willing to take extraordinary measures to try to help us and redeem us. In Matthew 4:9, it reads, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." See, God's plan of salvation is for all people. That's the essential message of the Gospels. For me, it's expressed at the very ending of the story. When Jonah sees that he was successful, he has this inner struggle with the traditions of how he was raised, this belief that God would punish all who did evil against the nation of Israel. How could the God of Israel, who had destroyed Pharaoh's army as they pursued the fleeing Israelites, allow these enemies of God's people off the hook? It just couldn't be so. So Jonah builds a hut atop a hill so he can keep an eye on Nineveh. He wants to see if God is really going to let them off for all their evil ways. He's probably also more than a little skeptical that these people's newly found morality is really going to last. Maybe it was all a put on to fool God. And in no time, the streets will be filled with prostitutes, gambling dens, gangsters running things. Who knows what they'll do? Or maybe he's just on standby in case God really needs him to go back and really let them have it. Anyway, he camps out to wait. The summer comes and it's getting hot up there, and he starts complaining to God. So a tree grows up by his hut, providing shade. I'm imagining something like kudzu, which can grow several feet a day. And then along comes another creature whose eating causes the tree to die. It's all God's fault. Jonah starts complaining again. All this suffering's for what? And here's the beautiful punchline to the story. God says, "You were sorry to see the plant die, though you did not make it grow, though it came up in a night and died in a night. And should not I have pity on Nineveh, that great city, where there are more than 100,000 little children and also many cattle, all helpless and knowing nothing?" You see, God forgives our trespasses and our ignorance. God loves not only the people of Israel or Lutherans, but all people of every time and place, of all cultures and customs, and all the life in this beautiful world he created. We need to learn to do the same. Amen.